welcome to another edition of the Simsbury Woman. My name is Shannon Knall. Thank you so much for joining us here today. I'm excited for our guest on today's edition of the Simsbury Woman. This is Beth Lambert. She is a Simsbury resident and author of a book you may have seen around called A Compromised Generation, the Epidemic of Chronic Illness in America's Children. So we are going to be talking about the book, about her experiences, and about how we as a community can learn more. So thank you so much for being with us here today, Beth.
Thanks, Shannon. I'm happy to be here.
So let's jump right in, because in skimming through the book and reading excerpts of the book, I can relate to it a lot, having a child with autism. There are some pieces that I've underlined in here that are quite familiar to my life. So behind everything, there's a story. So how did you jump into this? How did you go down this path?
Well, I was in grad school and I had my first child, and actually had just had my second child, and I started noticing some symptoms in my children, particularly my first, and they were the kind of thing that I went to a whole variety of physicians, so gastroenterologist, allergist, my regular pediatrician, and nobody really had any answers for these symptoms. I mean, they were the kind of things that range from behavioral symptoms to skin rashes, and there was no answers as to what was causing these symptoms. And then I started noticing the same thing in my second child. So as I was looking for answers as to what was contributing to these symptoms, I started investigating the root causes on my own, and also through finding some physicians who work in integrative medicine, who use a more holistic approach to how they manage symptoms. And I also started noticing that a lot of my peers had children with either diagnoses or symptoms. So I had friends who had children with autism, or who were getting different kinds of strange diagnoses I'd never heard of before. So something like sensory processing disorder. That wasn't something that was around when I was growing up. Of course, there was the asthma and the eczema and the allergies. There's so many allergies. And so I had this moment of awakening when I started saying, what is happening to all these kids? Why are all these kids affected with these symptoms? Or what is this phenomenon that's going on? And so since I was in grad school, I decided to research it and to delve into what could possibly have changed over the last 20, 40, 50 years that might be making all of our kids allergic and autoimmune and intolerant to their environment. And so that's how I got to writing the book. I was doing a healing journey for my kids, so I was actually finding all kinds of integrative and holistic practitioners who were able to help reverse those symptoms in my kids. So we were able to get rid of all their symptoms, get them healthier. We changed our environment, changed our diet, but at the same time, I was also understanding what was causing their symptoms in the first place. And so that ultimately ended up in the writing of my book. I started a nonprofit organization called Epidemic Answers to try and give some answers to parents, to try and say, if you go to your conventional doctor and the answers aren't there, that doesn't mean the answers don't exist, that you just need to knock on different doors and find different answers.
And this is a really interesting scenario, because, and a very challenging scenario. When you go to your doctor, your primary care physician or your pediatrician, and I know, having been there, when you keep going back and saying, but this is not, nothing is changing, we're not getting better. The initiative that you have to take to look outside of what is normal, what is typical medicine, is daunting. It's hard to find information. There's no one central location to do this sort of thing. So it's a very difficult path for parents to go down, if you're from the parent perspective. But it is accessible. So can you share with us and with the viewers how we can get more information?
Sure. One of the problems I see with the medical system that we have today is that it's a sick care model. So all our physicians, or the vast majority of our physicians, who are highly intelligent, highly skilled people, are trained typically in a symptom-based model. So that means you have a symptom, you go to the doctor, and the doctor gives you some kind of something to help that symptom. So it's usually a pharmaceutical. And then you walk away, but you didn't address the root cause of the symptom. So that's what I mean by a sick care model.
Right.
You have to be sick before you end up going to the doctor. I think there's a lot of doctors who try to get their patients to do preventative medicine, but there's a cultural component too. We're not really embracing prevention the way we should be. That's the Western-based model, the conventional medical model. There's so many other medical traditions. If we go to traditional Chinese medicine or homeopathy, other different kinds of approaches that are more holistic, more integrative, and more prevention-based. They're more well-care models than they are sick care models. And so what I think is so frustrating for parents is that they are trapped culturally in this sick care model. So you have your child, just like I was in, my child had symptoms. I didn't pay attention to anything until the symptoms arose. Once the symptoms arose, then you go to your doctors expecting answers.
Yes.
And the doctors are not miracle workers, so they give you what they have in their tool bag. But beyond that, you need to take on some initiative and find out, well, what does it take to keep a child or yourself healthy? What does it require? And that requires a preventative mindset. So it's diet and what's in the environment. The other piece is that we're not really trained culturally to think about what in our environment could be affecting our health. So we live in this incredibly consumer-oriented society where we have, you watch the commercials on TV and everything that comes out of Procter & Gamble and SC Johnson Wax or whatever all these companies are, they're putting out these great products. You want them. And you don't really question whether those products are healthy or not healthy. And you could be taking in things that are toxic to your body every day and not even be aware of it because it's advertised to you as normal and what we do.
Right.
So part of that prevention-based model is also an awareness of what in my environment might be contributing to disease in my body. What might be burdening my body? What might be providing a toxic burden? So a lot of it is shifting culturally.
Right.
And start thinking, all right, how do I keep myself well instead of reacting to symptoms?
Right. I think that's a great explanation of, and I'm sure many people can relate to that of going to the doctor, and that's exactly what you do. You're treating symptoms. You're not, preventing disease first. So, I think people struggle with exactly as what you said, is how to break out of that traditional mold, and it is a cultural situation for sure.
Right.
Now, in this book, you had some help from a foreword by Dr. Nancy OHara, who is in the field of kind of looking elsewhere to explain symptoms. Can you explain your relationship with her and how she was able to, or how she was a contributor to the book?
Sure. Well, Nancy OHara is one of the, it's like almost like a new crop of physicians. When I say that, I just mean that there haven't been that many physicians that are trained in this kind of medicine up until recently. In the last 20 years or so, you're getting a whole new influx of physicians who are getting trained in something called integrative medicine, or functional medicine is another word. And what physicians who are trained in this kind of modality are trained to do is look at the root causes of disease or illnesses. So that means looking at what somebody's eating, and what is in their environment, what kinds of things have they been exposed to, what kinds of things have their parents been exposed to. And so that's a new type of practitioner who does a much more comprehensive kind of assessment. So it doesn't really work in that model where you walk into the physician's office and you have 5 or 10 minutes. That's kind of the managed care system, where you walk in and you have these really short experiences with your physician. In this model, you're talking about sitting down with somebody for an hour and a half or 2 hours and filling out comprehensive information about what you eat and what you think and what you believe and what you do, and how does that impact your health. So Nancy OHara is one of those types of physicians. There are others. There are dietitians who do this kind of work. They're trained in integrative or functional medicine as well. And they're just one type of holistic practitioner. Right. Nancy was the one who actually helped my kids get on the recovery journey. I mean, she basically said, all right, well, here's your kids with your symptoms. And, something's going on with their skin and their bellies are distended and they have all these allergic type symptoms. Let's look at why. So you do blood work, you can do urine analysis and stool analysis. There's all different kinds of things that are not traditionally done in the physician's office that an integrative or functional medicine practitioner can do, different kinds of tests that can be run that look at where the imbalance is. And what we found with my kids, for instance, was that their immune systems were completely dysregulated. Their immune systems were out of whack, so their immune systems were attacking their bodies in ways that they shouldn't have been. And so that's what Nancy OHara did for my family, got me on the right track, in addition to a few other holistic healthcare practitioners. She also reviewed my book. She was a medical editor, so she, my book is very, it's steeped in medical literature, and she was somebody who went through and did my, fact-checking on that.
Well, and I think that that's important to mention, because there's always controversy about, and I'm kind of reaching into my experience within the autism community. There's always controversy about medical proof, so to speak. And I love that there is such thorough documentation of your research in here, and citations, and you can refer to science. So I think that's really important, and it's also very awakening also, if you will. And at this time in our society where our kids are being ravaged by autism, ADHD, allergies, eczema, asthma, a lot of the information that you put out there really begs the question about what are we doing, and what are we eating, and what is our environment doing to this generation of children. So it is a very eye-opening book. So how have you moved forward from here? Because I know you're a very busy woman, and you are working on additional projects. So tell us a little bit about that.
So the outgrowth of the book, I'm fully aware that people don't really read books. I mean, I wrote this book to sort of educate other parents really about what the options are, sort of what's happening to our kids, why historically what's happened, why is this happening, and what can we do about it. But because people don't really read books, I feel like the next thing to do is to try and spread the message in any other way possible. So I started a nonprofit organization with a web-based platform to try and educate people. Again, that's called Epidemic Answers. And then the latest project of Epidemic Answers is that we're trying to fund the making of a documentary film. But it's not just a documentary film, it's actually a project that is meant to push the envelope with regard to chronic illness in children and how we manage it. What I mean by that is we're taking 14 children and we are giving them free healing and recovery services. So these would be children who have autism or ADHD or juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, eczema or atopic disease, and a few other therapeutic categories. And we're going to be giving them all the healing support that they would need for 18 months. And then what we're going to do is document their journeys on film, and not just on film, but we also have a really robust medical advisory team that is helping us to document what's going on physiologically with these kids as well. So we're going to take baseline labs on these kids at the beginning. So imagine you have all these kids with these diagnoses and you take labs on them, blood, urine, stool, EEGs, brain scans, all this kind of data that you can collect non-invasively. And that will document the dysfunction in their body. Then as we support them and give them healing over the period of 18 months, you're going to see those parameters change. In other words, what you can measure on them is going to improve. You can measure the progress. And at the end of the program, you're going to have children whose all these biomarkers, all these ways of measuring them are going to be improved. And so you'll have the scientific data at the end showing that when you change diet and you change the environment, these things change, they get healthier. And we'll have that documented on film and with scientific data.
Amazing.
So it's really a project. I mean, it started out as an idea. I wanted to make a documentary film to show people that A, that kids get better, but B, let's pay attention to what is making them sick in the first place. But it's really exploded since then because there's a lot of amazing scientists and physicians who understand this and want to get behind this idea, knowing that in order for this epidemic to end, we need to push the envelope, we need to raise people's awareness, and what better way to do that through a movie?
Absolutely. And to your point, I mean, it's hard to resist seeing it and seeing the transition over time. It's hard to refute that as evidence.
Exactly.
But also to your point, I mean, this is not something that stops with this generation of children. There are future generations that will be impacted by the kind of world that we live in and the kind of food sources that we provide to them. So this is something that can be an ongoing project for generations to come.
Absolutely. I mean, if you look back a couple generations, when you really start seeing the very, very, very beginnings of this epidemic, you can go back to the middle of the 19th century. So before the middle of the 19th century, you really didn't have allergy. It didn't exist. I mean, very rare cases, bee stings would cause allergy in people, but there was no allergy to wheat. There was no dairy intolerance. There was no hay fever, environmental allergies even. And then each subsequent generation, you're seeing bodies react to their environment in increasingly more complex ways. So if you go back to our grandparents' generation, sort of that post-World War II generation, you didn't see any of these diagnoses we're looking at today. You rarely saw something like asthma, and you certainly didn't see autism, and you didn't see these learning and behavioral disorders that we have today. And then every generation subsequent is getting more and more and more. So you can imagine what it's going to look like. Our children's children and our grandchildren, the numbers are just going up like this. So at what point are we going to wake up and say, this is unacceptable, we need to do something about this? And I'm firmly convinced it's the responsibility of our generation to do something about this, because we have enough sick kids to be able to ring the bells and say, this is an epidemic, let's stop this. But it requires educating people and making that cultural shift, as you were mentioning.
Well, absolutely, because it will take, it can't be, parents here and there. It has to be a complete movement supported by a community. So to that point, what can we as a community or as communities do to educate ourselves and to, make the generations to come healthier?
Well, I think there's a lot in popular culture right now that's sort of on the periphery talking about this. There's a lot of great documentary films, for instance, that are beginning to help us question what we're doing. So examples would be documentaries like Food Inc. Or Forks Over Knives or Genetic Roulette. These are documentaries that are questioning the food supply and how we get the food that we eat, and is it healthful? Those are ways of addressing it on a really an easy way. You can watch a film, you can share a film, you can talk about it with your friends. And the same thing, there's dozens and dozens of books on this subject that are beginning to cause us to question what we do on a daily basis. Things like Fast Food Nation would be an example. Or Michael Pollan's book, he's got a really simple one called Food Rules, which is his original Omnivore's Dilemma. It was complex in looking at our food supply, but Food Rules is a simple book that looks at how do I eat healthfully and sustainably. And it's literally, you can read it in an hour, but it's the kind of thing you can pass on to friends. So the books and the films, I think local groups, there's a lot of local groups that are trying to help educate their community. There's one here in Simsbury that started called the Greenhouse of Simsbury, which is literally just a group of people getting together and saying, hey, let's learn from each other. How can we live more healthfully? What can we do to live more sustainably? And right now they're screening films every month or so at the library. And it's another great way to just begin the dialogue, to begin the discussion.
And even I think this movement that you talk about that is kind of on the fringes has started to infiltrate even legislatively. I mean, Connecticut working to label GMOs or food with GMOs in it. That's a big step. It may seem small, but it's a big step in not only raising awareness, but holding people accountable for living healthfully, as you say. So,
and that's a perfect example. The GMO debate is one that I think some people are very aware of, and other people don't even know what a GMO is. So in Europe, other places throughout the world, they are banning genetically modified organisms, foods that contain them. But the United States is behind that trend. And that's a matter, I think, of education and awareness. But like, as you said, there's enough awareness in this state, at least, where that has been taken to the legislative level, where we're now trying to say, all right, well, we could at least label these things. And that is a result of people talking about it. It's the Institute of Responsible Technology, which is Jeffrey Smith's organization, which is just trying to say, should we be eating genetically modified organisms? What does the science say? Is this healthful? And sharing that information, again, Genetic Roulette was one of those documentary films that raised awareness about that. So sharing the information is the way to push that issue forward, I think.
And Genetic Roulette has been shown at the library.
We have not shown that one yet, but that is something that is of that vein. That's the type of films that we are showing. So There are a couple more. I think Forks Over Knives is the next one that's going to be shown,
Great.
which again looks at the food supply.
Great.
And how and the standard American diet. A big piece of it's not the only part by any stretch, but a big piece of why so many kids are sick today is the standard American diet. We eat a very processed diet with a lot of preservatives and additives and genetically modified organisms, and it's just not what we need to sustain our health.
Right.
So having that conversation alone is hugely important.
Right. And I think that something that we were talking about off air as well, which is important to this dialogue, is that we don't judge people for the choices that they make or the reasons that they make certain decisions. But as education grows and as awareness grows, people will hopefully come to these realizations on their own. But in the meantime, in order to continue an open dialogue, we have to eliminate the judgment. People are judged on enough things.
Right. I mean, that's the piece to me that's so interesting about this phenomenon is that everybody in this culture is touched by this epidemic of chronic illness, and everybody's doing the same things that are contributing to it. So there can't be any judgment because we're all doing it. We're all part of this culture.
Right.
You know, we can't separate ourselves from it. But what I think is really interesting is that there are other choices we can make. So for example, we could take advantage of the local resources we have here. So like Hull's Farm or Holcomb Farm are offering these amazing organically grown, healthy foods that we're not using. We're choosing to, go to Stop and Shop and buy our foods that are coming from overseas or from California or where have you. And that's a simple choice we make. There's no judgment in that. It's just making a different choice that we know to be a little bit healthier once we have that information.
Right. And I have to admit that I'm new to the farm share scene, but this past year I've just started that at both Halls and at Holcomb, and it's been eye-opening even from that perspective to be able to learn how to cook this way and how to feed my family this way and the benefits of feeding my family this way. It's so you're right, and I think we have those opportunities right here in Simsbury or certainly in the surrounding areas that are wide open to us, and I think.
But it's not how we necessarily grew up. I mean,
No.
I can speak for myself, but I think this is a very common experience, was that I grew up eating out of cans and out of freezers. I mean, I had a can of SpaghettiOs for my lunch, and that's just sort of what I knew. That's what, my mom cooked a lot, but nonetheless, we still had a lot of processed or packaged foods. That is part of our generation. That's part of our experience. The boxed cereals and everything was just what we knew. We didn't know anything different. But now what we can say is this is not the way it's always been. If you go back just 50 years, people didn't eat this way. They spent a lot more money on their food, and it was a higher quality food, and they were a lot healthier. And so we have to just pause for a second and say, all right, maybe the way we grew up was kind of this brief moment in history that was an anomaly, and maybe we just need to get back to the way that things should be, which is that your food is high quality, it's more locally grown if you can get it, and it's less processed and just more nutritious.
Right. Well, technology is always a double-edged sword, I suppose. So what's next? So you're working on the movie. Epidemic Answers is the website that you are manning. What else do you have in mind for local education?
Well, so Epidemic Answers is it's a national education outreach. Canary Kids is the name of the documentary film project I'm working on. So we have two websites that are accessible, epidemicanswers.org and then canarykidsmovie.com. And so those are our broader initiatives. We're trying to raise money for Canary Kids movie right now, so I'm doing a lot of fundraising for that. But as far as locally, I think what I'm actually doing is kind of following the coattails of some other people in the community who have helped to build the greenhouse of Simsbury. They're actually doing a lot of the legwork, and they're looking at, well, what can we do to support each other and use each other's resources in the community to try and make the whole community healthier. So for example, there's women that are involved with that group that are experts in mindfulness. There are women who are holistic health coaches, and that's what they do for their living, is they help teach families how to eat better and how to make their environment healthier and just how to make their lives healthier. So I feel like I have things to learn from them. We all kind of share information, and it's meant to be more of a knowledge sharing rather than a sort of just a straight out educational
Right.
kind of thing,
Right.
which I think is great because there's so many resources in this community that I think are underutilized. You know, so if we can do more and bring more people into that, we're going to do a lot better, and the whole community will benefit, I think. So my hope is that the greenhouse grows, because I know there's so many more wellness businesses and individuals in the community that would really enhance the whole experience. So my hope is that that grows and goes into the schools, and we're able to do different initiatives in the schools.
Absolutely. So we're kind of coming to an end of our show, but I do want to reiterate your point that there are so many amazing resources. I find that all the time on this show, right here in Simsbury. There are tremendous people doing tremendous things that are kind of under the radar. So I hope, it's always a hope to kind of bring those to the surface a little bit. But if there was, say, one or two things that you would say to families who are starting to go down the road that you have gone down with your, mostly because of a result of your children, or your children being behavioral or having symptoms, what is the one piece of advice that you would give them?
I think the one piece of advice would be pay attention to your children's symptoms and what they're eating, and see if there's a correlation. There's a massive epidemic of food sensitivities, and most children are touched by it, but most parents don't know about it, and there aren't great diagnostics for it. So in other words, if your child's eating wheat every day and you notice that they're having these behavioral problems after lunch or after dinner, maybe start connecting the dots. So my piece of advice is pay attention to what goes in and what comes out, because then you're going to start getting to the root of what may be contributing to the symptoms.
And I would suspect you could add to that to be persistent in your research. Do your research, and you know, we always say, you know your child, and
Right.
so, you know, do your research and be persistent in your efforts.
Follow your gut. Mommy's guts, daddy's guts know better than anyone else about their kids. So I think you're absolutely right about that.
Yes. Well, thank you for all the work that you've done, and thank you for being here with us today. Also, if you haven't seen this book, A Compromised Generation, I would recommend that people pick it up. I think also this is a great resource for parents who might be wondering what's going on with their kids, or looking to learn a little bit more about this compromised generation and chronic illness in our kids. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you for all the work that you do. I wish you much success down the road, and we'll look forward to hearing about everything that you're doing.
Great. Thanks, Shannon.
And thank you for joining us on another edition of the Simsbury Woman. I'm Shannon Knall. Please join us again next month as we continue our show. Thank you.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.